Alexandra Sutton disappeared into the wilderness of Yosemite like morning mist burning away in the California sun. Her camera bag was found at her campsite, but her prized Nikon and the woman herself had vanished without a trace. 4 years of searches revealed nothing, not a single clue to explain what happened to the award-winning photographer who'd ventured alone to capture Yosemite's hidden treasures. Then came the rock slide, a catastrophic collapse of granite that forever altered the face of a remote valley wall. And there, exposed in the fresh wound of the mountain, was the entrance to a cave that no modern map had ever recorded. Inside, amid the darkness that had remained undisturbed for centuries, rescue workers found Alexandra's skeletal remains, her camera clutched in hands that had documented her own fate. A collection of haunting images that would reveal the terrible truth about her final days. If you're fascinated by unsolved wilderness mysteries that challenge what we think we know about the great outdoors, hit that subscribe button now. This story changed how park rangers approach missing persons cases forever. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. I'm curious how far Alex's story will travel today. And if you've ever ventured into nature alone, this account might make you reconsider what precautions you take on your next adventure.
Yosemite does not forgive mistakes. It rises from the Sierra Nevada mountain range, a cathedral of stone carved by ancient glaciers and time's relentless patience. Half Dome stands as its centerpiece, a monolith of granite sliced in two as if by a giant's cleaver, while El Capitan's sheer 3,000-foot face dares climbers to test their courage against its unforgiving vertical reality. The valley floor stretches between these titans, a deceptively gentle landscape of meadows and forests bisected by the Merced River's cold, clear waters. But beyond these famous landmarks, beyond the crowded overlooks and well-maintained trails, Yosemite harbors secrets. Miles of unmapped territory where cell phones fall silent, where GPS signals bounce uselessly off granite walls, where the wilderness reclaims its domain from human intrusion. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and hidden danger, of sudden storms that transform trickling streams into raging torrents, of rock slides that can alter the landscape without warning, of predators that move like shadows through the trees. For centuries, people have come here seeking solace, adventure, or simply to stand humbled before nature's grandeur. Alexandra Sutton came for all these reasons, but primarily for the light, that magical, ephemeral quality that transformed ordinary landscapes into transcendent images. She came to capture what she called wilderness truths, those fleeting moments when nature reveals itself in perfect clarity. She would find a truth more profound and terrible than she ever imagined. Alexandra, Alex to her friends, moved through the world with a quiet intensity that seemed at odds with her physical presence. At 32, she was slight but strong, her frame hardened by years of carrying heavy camera equipment across difficult terrain. Her hair was typically pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face tanned and weathered by a life spent outdoors. But it was her eyes that people remembered, a startling blue-gray eye that seemed to absorb everything, cataloging details others missed. She saw things differently, her sister Natalie would later tell investigators. Where most people just saw a mountain or a tree, Alex saw composition, light, emotion. She didn't just take pictures of nature, she translated it. That talent for translation had transformed Alex from a promising but unfulfilled marketing executive to one of the most respected nature photographers of her generation. The transition hadn't been easy. 5 years earlier, she'd walked away from a six-figure salary at a San Francisco advertising firm, cashed out her 401k, and purchased the camera equipment that would become extensions of herself. Everyone thought she was having a breakdown, her former colleague Diane Wong recalled. Walking away from that kind of security seemed insane. But Alex would bring her laptop to meetings and show us these incredible photos she'd taken on weekends. There was this light in her eyes when she talked about photography that was never there when she discussed marketing strategies. Her risk paid off faster than anyone expected. Within 18 months, her distinctive style, intimate wildlife portraits bathed in natural light, landscapes captured at the precise moment when shadow and illumination created perfect tension, had caught the attention of editors at National Geographic. Her first published spread, a series on Sierra Nevada red foxes, won her the prestigious Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. 3 more major awards followed in quick succession. Her Instagram account, @AlexandraSuttonWilderness, grew to over 500,000 followers. She published 2 coffee table books of her work. She was invited to speak at conservation events and photography conferences around the world. But commercial success was never her motivation. Money just meant freedom to her, Theo Maxwell, her occasional romantic partner and fellow photographer, said. Freedom to spend more time in the places she loved, to wait longer for the perfect shot, to go deeper into wilderness areas where most people never venture. Of all the wild places Alex frequented, Yosemite held a special significance. It was where she'd taken her first serious photographs as a teenager with a borrowed camera. It was where she'd returned after her mother's death, seeking solace in its ancient silence. It was where she'd captured the image that first brought her national attention, a mountain lion drinking from a still pool at dawn, mist swirling around its powerful frame like ghostly fingers. Her knowledge of the park was encyclopedic. She could name every waterfall, identify the best time of year to photograph each valley, recite the geological history of its formation. Park rangers knew her by name and respected her backcountry skills. She had completed the John Muir Trail 3 times and knew sections of the park that even seasoned hikers rarely visited. She wasn't reckless, Anthony Diaz, a ranger who had known her for years, insisted. That's what made her disappearance so baffling. Alex had wilderness sense. She respected the park's power. She wasn't someone who took unnecessary risks. In the months before her final trip, Alex was working on what she described to friends as her most ambitious project yet, a photographic study of Yosemite's changing light throughout the seasons, focused particularly on its lesser-known regions. She planned to spend several 3-day stretches in the park over the course of a year, documenting the same locations as they transformed through seasonal cycles. She was looking for something specific, Natalie explained, scrolling through her sister's final text messages during an interview. She kept talking about discovering forgotten perspectives, viewpoints that had been overlooked because they weren't on the standard tourist routes. Her apartment in Oakland reflected this obsession. Topographic maps of Yosemite covered her walls, marked with annotations in her neat, precise handwriting. Books on the park's geology, wildlife, and history filled her shelves. Her refrigerator held little food, but was plastered with Post-it notes detailing sunrise and sunset times, moon phases, and weather patterns. In April, she had written in her journal, "I'm close to finding it, that perfect alignment of light and landscape that no one has captured before. Not because others haven't tried, but because they haven't looked in the right places. The park hides its most beautiful secrets from those unwilling to venture beyond the established paths." Those words would later seem prophetic in the most tragic way imaginable.
On the morning of June 14, 2019, Alexandra Sutton loaded her Honda CR-V with the precision of someone who had performed the same ritual dozens of times before. Her gear was arranged in waterproof bags, each one labeled with its contents: camera bodies, lenses, filters, tripods. Her camping equipment was similarly organized: ultralight tent, sleeping bag rated for mountain temperatures, compact stove, freeze-dried meals portioned for a 3-day excursion. Her sister would later describe a video call from that morning, Alex's face bright with anticipation as she completed her final checks. "She seemed so alive," Natalie recalled, her voice breaking. She kept saying the conditions were perfect, that the late spring melt combined with the forecast meant she might capture exactly what she'd been searching for. Alex had meticulously planned her route, sharing it with both her sister and park officials as required for backcountry permits. She would begin at the Glacier Point trailhead, hike to Illilouette Fall, then follow Illilouette Creek deeper into the less traveled southern section of the park. Her intended campsite was near a small, unnamed lake approximately 7 miles from the nearest maintained trail. She'd been to that general area before, confirmed Ranger Diaz, reviewing her permit application. It wasn't her first time in the backcountry, not by a long shot. She knew the protocols, where to store food away from bears, how to filter water, what to do in case of emergency. Her satellite messenger device was fully charged. Her first aid kit was stocked with prescription medications and wilderness essentials. She carried a detailed topographic map in a waterproof case, a compass, and a GPS unit as backup. Even her smartphone contained offline maps of the region, though she knew service would be non-existent once she left the main valley. "That was Alex," said Theo Maxwell, staring at a photograph of her gear spread across her living room floor. "She prepared for everything. She left nothing to chance." At 7:43 a.m., Alexandra texted her sister, "On my way. Weather looking perfect. Should reach base camp by mid-afternoon. We'll check in tonight." Security cameras at the Yosemite entrance station captured her CRV passing through at 9:12 a.m. At 10:05 a.m., she parked at the Glacier Point lot, shouldered her pack, and began her hike. A time-lapse camera installed by the Park Service to monitor visitor traffic caught a distant figure matching her description heading down the Panorama Trail. At 12:38 p.m., Alexandra encountered a group of hikers from Germany near Illilouette Fall. They would later provide investigators with the last confirmed photograph of her alive. Alex standing at the edge of the viewpoint, the waterfall thundering behind her, her expression of focused joy. She spoke with them briefly, recommending specific vantage points for their own photographs, then continued on her way as they headed back toward Glacier Point. She seemed completely normal, Lucas Weber, one of the German hikers, told investigators, confident, friendly, excited about her project. She mentioned wanting to reach her campsite with enough daylight to scout locations for a sunset shoot. At 4:17 p.m., Alexandra activated her satellite messenger from her planned camping location, sending a pre-programmed message to her sister indicating she had arrived safely. At 8:49 p.m., she sent a final text. "Found something incredible. There's a rock formation about a half-mile from camp that catches the last light in a way I've never seen before. Heading out at first light tomorrow to explore further up the drainage. This might be the perfect spot I've been searching for. The light here reveals everything." That cryptic message was the last anyone would ever hear from Alexandra Sutton. When no check-in came the following evening, Natalie wasn't immediately concerned. Cell reception was non-existent in the backcountry, and her sister had occasionally let her satellite messenger's battery die during intense photography sessions. When a second day passed without contact, however, the first flicker of worry took hold. Alex was religious about those check-ins. She knew I worried, especially when she was alone. 2 days of silence wasn't like her at all. On the morning of June 17, when Alex should have returned to her vehicle, Natalie called Yosemite Dispatch. Rangers confirmed that Alex's CRV was still parked at Glacier Point, now covered in a fine layer of dust. By that afternoon, the first search teams were assembling, still hopeful that they were mobilizing for a simple rescue, rather than what would become one of the most mysterious disappearances in the park's history. Ranger Catherine Reeves stood before a topographic map in the Yosemite Search and Rescue Command Center, her expression grave as she addressed the assembled team. A 15-year veteran of backcountry operations, Reeves had coordinated dozens of searches for missing hikers. Most ended within 24 hours, with the subject found disoriented but alive, having taken a wrong turn or twisted an ankle. Some ended in tragedy: falls from cliffs, drownings in swollen rivers, hypothermia in unexpected snowstorms. A few ended in frustrating uncertainty.
Something in her gut told her Alexandra Sutton's case would fall into this last category. Our subject is a 32-year-old, experienced solo hiker and professional photographer, she began, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. She's well-equipped, knows the terrain, and has a detailed itinerary. She traced the red line on the map indicating Alexandra's planned route, then circled the area around the unnamed lake where she had last sent a satellite message. This is our primary search zone. Teams 1 and 2 will approach from the Panorama Trail. Team 3 will come in from the south via the Buena Vista Trail. Helicopter support will conduct aerial sweeps as weather permits. This is not a novice hiker who wandered off the mist trail. This is someone who knows what she's doing in terrain that's challenging even for experienced backcountry users. The first breakthrough came just after noon on the second day of the search. A team pushing along Illuit Creek discovered Alexandra's campsite near the small lake exactly where her permit had indicated. The scene was deeply unsettling. Her tent was properly pitched, stakes securely anchored in the ground. Her sleeping bag was unrolled inside. Her food was correctly suspended in a bear canistry hung from a tree branch about 100 yards from the tent. A small cooking pot sat on her camp stove, the remnants of what appeared to be oatmeal dried inside. Her journal lay open on top of her sleeping bag, the last entry dated June 15, the morning after her final message. But Alexandra's main backpack, containing her camera equipment, was gone. So were her hiking boots and water filter. The camp had the appearance of someone who fully intended to return within hours. The journal entry provided the first clue to her movements. 5:42 a.m. First light breaking over the ridge. Heading to the formation I spotted yesterday, approximately 0.6 miles NNW of camp, following the small drainage uphill. Light should hit the western face around 7:30 a.m. based on yesterday's observations. If it's what I think it is, this could be the centerpiece of the winter/spring transition series. We'll scout for possible cave formations as well. Shadows yesterday suggested concavities in the cliff face that aren't marked on any topo map I've studied. Search dog handlings brought their animals to the campsite. A Belgian Malinois named Denali immediately picked up Alexandra's scent and led her handler along a faint game trail heading northwest from the camp, precisely the direction indicated in the journal. The dog followed the scent confidently for approximately half a mile before the trail reached a small stream. There, Denali became confused, circling and whining, unable to pick up the trail on the opposite bank. It was as if she had walked into the water and never emerged, explained handler Teresa Rodriguez. Dogs can follow scent through water for short distances, but something about this situation confused Denali completely. We crossed and quartered the area on the other side for hours, but she couldn't re-establish the trail. A second dog, a German shepherd named Atlas, produced identical results. Both animals tracked Alexandra confidently to the stream, then lost her trail entirely. The third day brought the most bewildering discovery. A growling team searching a half-mile further downstream from where the dogs had lost the scent found Alexandra's tripod wedged between two boulders at the edge of the water. It appeared to have been swept downstream by the current, though the stream was now running low and gentle. More disturbing was the state of the equipment. One of the legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and the mountain plate showed deep scratch marks inconsistent with water damage. It looked like it had been struck with considerable force, said forensic technician Rob Davenport, who examined the tripod.
The damage pattern suggested impact with a hard, irregular surface, consistent with a fall or possibly being thrown against rocks. The discovery shifted the focus of the search. Had Alexandra fallen while attempting to cross the stream? Had a flash flood caught her unaware? The water level was currently low, but mountain streams could rise rapidly during spring thaw or sudden rainfall. Helicopter sweeps were intensified, focusing on the downstream areas where a body might have been carried. Specialized teams with swift water rescue training combed the banks and pools for miles. Other teams began to climb the steep rock faces near where the tripod was found, searching for signs that Alexandra might have attempted to scale them. But the next significant development came from an unexpected source. A weather station, approximately 3 miles from the search area, had recorded an unusual seismic disturbance in the early morning hours of June 15, the same morning Alexandra had set out from her camp. The signature was consistent with a small, localized rock slide or cliff collapse. "These events aren't uncommon in Yosemite," explained geologist Dr. Renata Vasquez, who analyzed the data. "The park experiences hundreds of minor rock falls each year, most too small to be noticed by visitors. But the timing and location were certainly of interest to the investigation." The search area shifted again, now focused on a series of cliffs and talus slopes about a quarter-mile upstream from where the tripod had been discovered. If Alexandra had been near these cliffs during a rockfall, the consequences could have been catastrophic. On the 5th day of the search, as teams were meticulously combing the base of these cliffs, a powerful storm system swept through the Sierra Nevada. Thunder echoed through the canyons, lightning splintered across the sky, and torrential rain transformed every stream and drainage into a churning mass of white water. For safety reasons, the search was suspended. When teams returned 2 days later, the landscape had been transformed. The stream where the dogs had lost Alexandra's scent was now a raging torrent 3 times its previous width. New debris, fallen trees, boulders, mud covered much of the search area. Whatever trace evidence might have existed was now washed away or buried under feet of silt and rock. For 2 more weeks, search teams continued their efforts with diminishing returns. No further sign of Alexandra was found. No clothing, no additional equipment, no distress signals. It was as if the wilderness had simply swallowed her whole, leaving nothing but an abandoned campsite and a damaged tripod as evidence she had ever been there at all.
23 days after Alexandra Sutton vanished into the Yosemite backcountry, Ranger Catherine Reeves stood before a bank of microphones in the park's administration building. Camera flashes illuminated her exhausted face as she delivered the news no one wanted to hear. After more than 3 weeks of intensive search operations covering over 15 square miles of extremely challenging terrain, we are transitioning from active search to limited, continuous investigation. Our teams have exhausted all actionable intelligence and searchable areas without locating Ms. Sutton or additional evidence of her movements after June 15th. The clinical language did little to mask the grim reality. The official search for Alexandra Sutton was being suspended. Her case would remain open, but without new information, active field operations would cease. In the front row of the press conference, Natalie Sutton sat rigid, her face a mask of controlled anguish. Beside her, their father Thomas, a retired physics professor, stared blankly at the floor, a man hollowed out by grief and uncertainty. "This is not an abandonment," Reeves continued, her voice softening as she addressed the family directly. "Resources will remain allocated to this case. Any new information will trigger immediate response, and we will continue limited periodic searches of key areas as conditions permit." For the Sutton family, the suspension was an unbearable limbo, a recognition that Alexandra was presumed dead without the closure of recovered remains. Without a body, there could be no funeral, no grave to visit, no final certainty to ease the torment of imagination. The not knowing is what destroys you, Natalie would later tell a journalist from Outside magazine. Your mind creates 1,000 different scenarios, each worse than the last. Did she suffer? Was she alone and afraid? Could she have been saved if we'd realized sooner she was missing? These questions consume you until there's nothing left. Natalie refused to accept the official suspension as an endpoint. Within days, she had established the Find Alexandra Sutton Foundation, liquidating her savings and mortgaging her home to fund private search teams and maintain public awareness of her sister's case. The photography community rallied around the cause. Benefit exhibitions of Alexandra's work were held in galleries across the country. Fellow nature photographers volunteered for weekend search missions, combing areas of the park that official teams had been unable to fully explore. A prominent outdoor equipment manufacturer donated satellite communications devices to the foundation, allowing volunteer searchers to coordinate efforts in areas without cellular coverage. But as weeks turned to months, the momentum inevitably began to fade. Media coverage dwindled from front-page news to brief mentions in local papers. The foundation's funds gradually depleted. The pool of volunteer searchers shrank to a dedicated core group, then to just Natalie and a few close friends. Alexandra's disappearance had unnerving ripple effects throughout the outdoor community. Solo female hikers reported heightened anxiety about backcountry travel. Park rangers noted an increase in satellite messenger purchases and emergency beacon registrations. Hiking forums debated whether Alexandra's fate was the result of a tragic accident or something more sinister. Theories proliferated in the vacuum of concrete information. The most prevalent, and the one favored by search and rescue professionals, was that Alexandra had been caught in the small rock slide detected by the weather station. Perhaps she had been photographing near the base of a cliff when it partially collapsed, burying her beneath tons of granite. The damaged tripod seemed to support this theory, as did the complete absence of any trail beyond the stream. Others speculated about wildlife encounters, a mountain lion attack, or a confrontation with a black bear. But the lack of blood evidence or signs of struggle at her campsite made these scenarios less plausible. A darker theory emerged on true crime message boards, that Alexandra had encountered another hiker with malicious intent. The remote location, her solitude, and the complete disappearance of her body all fed this narrative. But extensive interviews with every registered hiker in the area during that time period yielded no suspects, and the difficulty of accessing her campsite made a chance encounter with an unregistered visitor highly unlikely. The most painful theory for the Sutton family was the suggestion that Alexandra had chosen to disappear, that she had orchestrated her own vanishing. Proponents pointed to passages in her journal about seeking solitude and disconnection from modern life. But those who knew her rejected this possibility outright. Alex loved her life, insisted Theo Maxwell. She was at the peak of her career, excited about future projects, and she would never have put her family through this kind of pain deliberately. 6 months after Alexandra's disappearance, a memorial service was held at the Yosemite Valley Chapel. No body was present, no ashes to scatter over the landscapes she had loved. Instead, an exhibition of her photographs transformed the small stone building into a gallery of light and wilderness. Bears emerging from winter dens, storm clouds gathering over Half Dome, sunlight filtering through giant sequoias. The final image displayed was the last photograph Alexandra had shared on social media before her fatal trip. A self-portrait taken near Glacier Point, her silhouette dark against the golden light of sunset, her camera raised to her eye. Beneath it, a quote from her journal: "I don't capture images. I translate moments of truth that the wilderness chooses to reveal. The privilege of witnessing these revelations is worth any risk." Those words, intended as a celebration of her passion, now read like a terrible premonition. The seasons turned in Yosemite with indifferent majesty. Summer's heat surrendered to autumn's golden touch. Leaves flamed briefly in crimson and amber before surrendering to the first frost. Winter draped the granite monoliths in mantles of snow and ice, transforming water vaults into frozen sculptures suspended between earth and sky. Spring returned with explosive greenery and the thunderous roar of meltwater cascading from every cliff and crevice. Until it was summer once more. A year had now passed since Alexandra vanished with the trace of a stream.
A year passed. Alexander Sutton's case file grew thick with reports, interviews, and analyses, yet paradoxically felt thinner with each passing month. The absence of new information, a void that expanded like a black hole, consuming hope. Natalie continued her searches with diminishing resources and support. On the anniversary of her sister's disappearance, she hiked alone to the small lake where Alexandra had made her final camp. The area was transformed. New growth covered the clearing where the tent had stood. The fire ring was barely visible beneath a carpet of pine needles. The tree branch from which the bare canister had hung was now broken, likely from winter snow load. Nature had reclaimed the space, erasing the human presence that had briefly interrupted its ancient cycles. Natalie sat beside the lake until sunset, watching light move across the water in patterns her sister would have recognized and cherished. She left a small bronze plaque secured to a boulder, not a memorial, for she still refused to concede her sister's death, but a marker, a promise that Alexandra was not forgotten. The second year brought periodic flurries of interest and activity. A hiker reported finding a lens cap matching the model Alexandra used, though forensic analysis revealed it had been exposed to the elements for much longer than the time since her disappearance. A seasonal ranger thought he glimpsed a flash of color in an aerial photograph that might have been synthetic fabric, but ground teams found nothing at the location. By the third anniversary, Alexandra Sutton had become a park legend, a name mentioned during ranger safety talks, a cautionary tale shared around campfires, a ghost story that gained embellishments with each retelling. Her case was featured in a popular podcast about unsolved wilderness disappearances, bringing a brief resurgence of public interest, but no new leads. For investigators, the case represented a particular kind of frustration. Yosemite National Park encompasses nearly 1,200 square miles of wilderness, much of it rugged, remote, and rarely visited. The specific area where Alexandra had vanished was characterized by steep ravines, dense underbrush, and complex cliff systems that created countless places where a body or equipment could remain hidden indefinitely. Time works against us in these cases, explained Ranger Diaz, who had kept a special interest in the investigation. Each season brings changes to the landscape: rock slides, fallen trees, erosion, new vegetation. Evidence degrades or gets buried. Scavengers scatter remains. The wilderness actively erases human presence. The practical challenges were compounded by jurisdictional complexities. Parts of the search area crossed into wilderness managed by the Sierra National Forest rather than the National Park Service, requiring coordination between different federal agencies with varying protocols and resources. Perhaps most frustrating was the knowledge that Alexandra herself had been meticulously prepared. She had followed every recommended safety procedure, carried appropriate emergency equipment, filed detailed plans, and checked in regularly. Her disappearance challenged the comforting belief that proper preparation guaranteed safety in the backcountry. If it could happen to someone like Alexandra Sutton, Ranger Reeves noted in a training session for new park staff, it could happen to anyone. The wilderness doesn't care about your experience level or how carefully you've planned. As the fourth anniversary approached, the case had effectively gone cold. The Find Alexandra Sutton Foundation had been formally dissolved, its remaining funds donated to the park's search and rescue training program. Natalie had moved to Portland, unable to remain in California where memories of her sister were too present, too painful. Thomas Sutton had passed away, his death certificate listing natural causes, but those close to him attributed his decline to the grief he could never resolve. Alexandra's name joined the somber list of those the wilderness had claimed without explanation or closure, individuals who had stepped into the wild and been absorbed by it, leaving behind only questions and a lingering ache in the hearts of those who loved them. The truth that would shatter this uneasy silence was waiting to be revealed, hidden behind tons of ancient granite in a cave that no living person knew existed. On morning of May 23, 2023, the face of Yosemite changed. At 6:17 a.m., a massive section of cliff in a remote section of the Illilouette Creek Basin collapsed without warning. Thousands of tons of granite that had stood for millennia sheared away from the mountainside in a deafening roar of primordial violence. Trees that had clung to the steep slope for centuries were uprooted and crushed. Boulders the size of automobiles bounded down the mountainside, triggering secondary slides that reshaped drainage patterns and obliterated animal trails that had existed since before human memory. The rock slag was significant enough to register on seismographs throughout the Sierra Nevada. At park headquarters, monitors initially mistook the signature for a small earthquake, before satellite imagery confirmed the dramatic alteration to the landscape. No visitors were injured. The area was miles from any maintained trail and rarely visited even by the most adventurous backcountry hikers. Under normal circumstances, the event would have been noted in geological surveys, perhaps mentioned briefly in the park's naturalist programs, then forgotten by all except the specialists who studied Yosemite's ever-changing geology. But this rock slide would expose a secret that had been hidden for 4 years.
Dr. Lucas Fernandez, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, arrived by helicopter 3 days after the event. His assignment was routine: document the extent of the slide, assess its impact on local hydrology, and evaluate the stability of the remaining cliff face. Accompanied by a Park Service geotechnical expert, he spent the morning photographing the massive debris field and collecting samples for later analysis. After lunch, the pair began climbing the talus slope toward the fresh scar where the cliff had separated. Fernandez wanted core samples from the newly exposed rock face to determine the factors that had triggered the collapse. As they picked their way through the chaotic jumble of fractured stone, something caught his eye. An unnatural dark opening in the lighter granite, about 2/3 of the way up the slope. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or vegetation pocket, Fernandez would later report. But something about the geometry seemed too regular, too defined. As we got closer, I realized we were looking at the entrance to a cave that had been completely sealed before the rock slide. The opening was narrow, barely 3 feet wide and 5 feet high, but appeared to extend deep into the mountain. Cool air flowed from the entrance, carrying the musty scent of long enclosed space. Fernandez photographed the opening, marked its GPS coordinates, and made a note to include it in his report. Cave formations weren't uncommon in the Sierra Nevada, though they were more typically found in marble or limestone rather than granite. It might have ended there, a scientific curiosity noted and set aside for future exploration by the park's cave management team. But as Fernandez turned to continue his ascent, his headlamp illuminated something just inside the cave entrance that didn't belong in a natural formation. A flash of color against the monotone gray of the stone. He stepped closer, directing the beam toward the anomaly. There, partially visible behind a small boulder, was what appeared to be a synthetic fabric in a bright teal color. I immediately thought of discarded camping equipment, Fernandez explained. Unfortunately, even remote areas of the park sometimes contain trash left by careless visitors. But given how completely sealed this cave must have been before the rock slide, that explanation made no sense. Protocol dictated that he document the finding, but not disturb it. Potential archaeological sites in the park required specialized teams for proper excavation. Fernandez photographed the fabric, included it in his notes, and continued his geological assessment. That evening, he submitted his preliminary report to the Park Service, including mention of both the newly exposed cave and the unexplained synthetic material inside it. The report reached Ranger Catherine Reeves 2 days later. The mention of teal fabric triggered an immediate response. Alexandra Sutton's high-end backpack, missing since her disappearance 4 years ago, had been that exact color, a distinctive shade that had featured prominently in the search bulletins 4 years earlier. Within hours, a specialized team was assembled. Unlike the original search effort, which had involved dozens of personnel spread across miles of wilderness, this team was small and focused. Reeves herself, a cave technical specialist, a forensic technician, and a Park Service photographer to document every step of the investigation. The helicopter dropped them at the rockslide site late the following morning. They carried minimal equipment, helmets with powerful headlamps, technical climbing gear, evidence collection kits, and a portable stretcher that could be used to remove human remains if necessary. No one voiced the possibility aloud, but the same thought occupied every mind. After 4 years of mystery, they might finally discover what had happened to Alexandra Sutton. The climb to the cave entrance was treacherous. The rockslide had left the slope unstable, loose stones shifting underfoot with each step. Twice, small cascades of debris forced them to change route. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the narrow opening that Fernandez had photographed. Up close, the entrance appeared even smaller than it had in the images, a tight squeeze that would require careful maneuvering. The cave specialist, a compact woman named Veronica Lloyd, who had mapped underground systems throughout the western states, went first. She examined the opening methodically, testing the stability of the surrounding rock before slowly disappearing into the darkness. Her voice echoed back to the team waiting outside. The entrance tunnel extends about 15 feet, then opens into a larger chamber. The floor appears stable, no immediate structural concerns. One by one, the team followed her into the mountain. The tunnel was claustrophobically narrow, requiring them to proceed in a crouch, shoulders brushing the rough stone on either side. The beam of their headlamps illuminated dancing dust particles suspended in the still air. The temperature dropped noticeably as they moved deeper, and the outside sounds of wind and distant water faded to silence. Then the tunnel widened abruptly, opening into a chamber approximately 30 feet in diameter with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. Their headlamps swept across the space, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the walls. And there, against the far wall of the chamber, was Alexandra Sutton. She sat with her back against the stone, her legs extended before her, her head tilted slightly, as if she had been looking toward the ceiling in her final moments. 4 years in the cool, dry environment of the sealed cave had preserved her remains to a remarkable degree. Her clothing, hiking pants, a long-sleeved thermal shirt, sturdy boots, was largely intact. Her hair, once blonde but now colorless in the harsh light of the headlamps, still clung to her skull. The skin had mummified, drawing tight across her facial bones in a grotesque mask that retained just enough of her features to be recognizable from photographs. Beside her lay her teal backpack, unzipped and partially emptied. Water bottles, energy bars, spare batteries, and other small items were arranged in a neat semicircle within arm's reach. Most striking of all, her camera, the professional-grade Nikon she had been known for, rested in her lap, her skeletal fingers still curled around its body in a photographer's grip. The team stood in stunned silence for several seconds, the only sound their own breathing echoing in the enclosed space. Then training took over. The forensic technician began photographing the scene from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive visual record before anything was touched. Reeves spoke quietly into her radio, confirming they had found human remains and requesting additional personnel for recovery operations. "No one touch anything yet," she instructed, her voice tight with emotion. "We document everything exactly as it is before we move a single item." The initial documentation took over an hour. Every item was photographed in situ, its position mapped in relation to Alexandra's remains and the cave features. As the process continued, a narrative began to emerge, one that answered some questions about Alexandra's faith while raising new ones that would haunt investigators for months to come. It appeared that Alexandra had taken shelter in this cave, perhaps to escape a sudden storm or to explore a photographic opportunity. At some point, a rockfall, likely the seismic event recorded 4 years ago, had sealed the entrance completely, trapping her inside. The cave, once a temporary refuge, had become a tomb. But this initial theory raised immediate questions. How would Alexandra even find this cave, which wasn't marked on any Park Service map? Why had search dogs been unable to track her scent to its original entrance? And most puzzling of all, why had she ventured so far from her planned route into an area that hadn't been included in the original search parameters? The answers, or at least clues to them, might be contained in the most valuable evidence of all: the camera that Alexandra had clutched until her final breath, and the images preserved in its memory card. The recovery operation lasted 2 days. A specialized team from the County Medical Examiner's Office joined the Park Service personnel, bringing additional forensic equipment and expertise in recovering remains from confined spaces. Each item in the cave was meticulously documented, bagged, and labeled before being transported by helicopter to the park's forensic facility. Alexandra's remains were treated with particular care and dignity. Her body was gently placed in a specialized transport container designed to preserve any remaining physical evidence. The recovery team worked in near silence, the gravity of the moment not lost on anyone present. This wasn't just the conclusion of a search operation. It was the recovery of a woman who had been missed and mourned for 4 years. Natalie Sutton was notified immediately after positive identification was confirmed through dental records. She flew from Portland that same day, arriving at park headquarters as the sun set behind the massive granite formations her sister had loved. Ranger Reeves met her personally, leading her to a private room where Alexandra's recovered possessions were laid out on examination tables. "I need to see everything," she insisted, her voice steady despite the shock. "I need to understand what happened to her." Among the items was Alexandra's camera, now secured in an evidence bag. The forensic technician explained that they have not yet attempted to access its memory card, as special care would be needed to ensure no data was lost. "That camera was practically an extension of her hand," Natalie said, staring at the bag. "If anyone can tell us what happened, it's Alex herself through her photographs." The camera was transported to the FBI's Digital Evidence Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. There, specialists with experience recovering data from damaged devices worked to extract the contents of the memory card without compromising its integrity. The process was delicate. The card had been exposed to 4 years of temperature fluctuations and potential condensation inside the cave, despite the relatively stable environment. 3 days later, the lab reported success. They had recovered 258 image files from the card, arranged chronologically from June 14th through June 18th, 2019, spanning from the beginning of Alexandra's hike to 4 days after she was last heard from. The images told a story more clear and heartbreaking than any witness account could have provided. The first several dozen photographs were what might be expected from a professional nature photographer on a backcountry expedition. Sweeping landscapes captured in perfect light, intimate details of wildflowers and insects, a few self-portraits taken with a timer at scenic vistas along her planned route.
On the morning of June 15, the day she left camp for the last time, the photographs showed her planned destination, a striking rock formation that caught the first light of dawn in a way that transformed the ordinary granite into a luminous, natural sculpture. Several images captured this formation from different angles, experimenting with composition and exposure. Then came a series that showed her moving off her planned route, following what appeared to be a game trail leading toward higher elevation. The timestamps indicated these were taken between 8:45 and 9:30 a.m. The trail led to a small stream,
presumably the same one where the search dogs had lost her scent years earlier. At 9:47 a.m., Alexandra photographed something that clearly captivated her professional eye. A narrow, dark opening in the cliff face, partially obscured by vegetation, but visible as a shadow against the lighter stone. Several close-up shots followed, documenting what appeared to be ancient pictographs barely visible on the rock surrounding the opening. Faded red ochre markings that resembled deer or elk, along with abstract geometric patterns. These are Native American rock art, confirmed Dr. Eleanor Blackwell, an archaeologist specializing in Sierra Nevada indigenous cultures who was consulted about the images. They're consistent with Miwok or possibly Paiute styles, likely hundreds of years old. This cave entrance may have had spiritual significance. It's not surprising it wasn't on Park Service maps. Many such sites are kept confidential to protect them from vandalism or looting. The next sequence of photographs documented Alexandra's exploration of the cave. The timestamps showed her venturing inside at approximately 10:15 a.m. Initial images captured the narrow entrance tunnel, followed by shots of the main chamber with its surprisingly high ceiling. She photographed small natural features, mineral formations, patterns in the rock walls, the play of light from the entrance across the stone floor. At 10:42 a.m., the nature of the photographs changed dramatically. A series of rapid-fire shots, some blurred with motion, showed rocks and debris falling across the cave entrance. The final image in this sequence showed the entrance completely sealed by fallen stone, with only a few rays of sunlight penetrating through small gaps. What followed was perhaps the most remarkable and haunting photographic record ever recovered in a missing persons case. Alexandra Sutton, trapped and alone in the darkness, had continued to document her experience. Using her camera's flash and the light from her headlamp, she photographed the blocked entrance from multiple angles, apparently assessing the possibility of clearing it. Several images showed her backpack contents spread across the cave floor. Water bottles, energy bars, spare batteries, a first aid kit, matches, and a small emergency blanket. The timestamps revealed a methodical approach to her predicament. For the first several hours, the photographs focused on practical matters, testing the stability of the fallen rocks, searching the chamber for any other possible exits, and cataloging her available supplies. As the day progressed, the nature of the photographs shifted. She began documenting herself, self-portraits showing her face transitioning from determination to concern to a kind of resigned clarity. She photographed her watch at regular intervals, marking the passage of time. She created still lifes from her possessions, arranging them in increasingly artistic compositions, as if treating her predicament as a final photo assignment. Most remarkable was a series of long exposure images capturing the complete darkness of the cave, broken only by the deliberate movement of her headlamp, creating swirls and patterns of light against the black background. These abstract compositions, created under the most desperate circumstances, displayed a stunning artistic vision that brought tears to the eyes of the forensic technicians analyzing them. "She was creating art right up until the end," whispered Natalie, viewing the recovered images for the first time. "That was Alex. That was who she was at her core." Alongside the photographs, investigators recovered Alexandra's journal, its waterproof pages preserving her final written thoughts. The entries aligned and expanded upon the visual narrative captured by her camera. June 15th, 10:52 a.m. The entrance collapsed without warning. No indication of instability before I entered. Rockfall appears substantial, several tons of material blocking the only way out. Initial attempts to clear smaller rocks unsuccessful. Larger boulders too heavy to move and appear to be supporting more material above. Shouting unlikely to be heard given remoteness of location. No cell signal as expected. Priority now is to assess resources and conserve energy. June 15th, 3:28 p.m. Inventory complete. 2 liters of water, 6 energy bars. Headlamp with approximately 30 hours of battery at low setting. Camera batteries sufficient for continued documentation. First aid kit intact but irrelevant to the current situation. No significant injuries from rockfall, thankfully. Temperature in the cave stable, approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival priorities water conservation. Without internal assistance, prospects are limited by water supply. June 16th, time unknown. Sleep was intermittent. Darkness is absolute when headlamp is off. A darkness beyond anything I've ever experienced. Attempting to clear the entrance again proved futile. Examined every surface of the chamber for potential alternative exits or air sources. None found. Cave appears to be a single chamber with one entrance, now blocked. Water consumption minimal, but thirst increasing. Beginning to accept the statistical improbability of rescue.
June 17. Time unknown. Strange how the mind adapts. Initial panic has given way to a kind of clarity. I've been photographing the darkness, using long exposures and controlled movement of my headlamp. The results are surprisingly beautiful. Perhaps this is what I've been searching for all along, a perspective no one else has captured. I've always translated what the wilderness reveals to me. Now I'm translating this final experience. If these images are ever found, perhaps they will speak in ways my words cannot. The final journal entry, undated but presumably from June 18, based on the camera timestamps, contained just a few lines. Water gone. Headlamp battery failing. No regrets about the path that led me here. The light in this darkness has been worth witnessing. I've seen things others never will. Translation complete. The medical examiner's report, combined with the photographic and written evidence, established dehydration as the cause of death. Alexandra had survived approximately 3 to 4 days in the cave before succumbing to thirst. The report noted that her death would have been relatively peaceful. A gradual weakening followed by unconsciousness, then organ failure. She had died as she lived, observing, documenting, translating the world around her through her unique artistic vision, even as that world had narrowed to a single dark chamber from which there was no escape. The photographs recovered from Alexandra Sutton's camera represented something unprecedented in the annals of wilderness tragedies, a complete, self-documented record of a person's final days, captured not in panic or desperation, but with deliberate artistic purpose. They provided not just evidence of what had happened to her, but a window into her mind as she faced her own mortality with extraordinary grace and clarity. A team of forensic analysts, psychologists, and art experts was assembled to study the images, both for their investigative value and for their remarkable artistic merit. What emerged was a narrative that challenged conventional understanding of human response to fatal entrapment. The earliest images after the cave-in showed Alexandra's practical efforts to escape, close-ups of the rock-pile blocking the entrance, various angles capturing potential weak points, photographs of her hands bloodied from attempting to move smaller stones. These were interspersed with inventory shots cataloging her limited supplies, creating a visual record of her resources.
These initial photographs reflect standard survival response, explained Dr. Alicia Henderson, a psychologist specializing in wilderness trauma. She's problem-solving, assessing her situation objectively, documenting her circumstances both as practical information and perhaps as a record for others should her body eventually be found. But as the hours passed and the reality of her situation became clearer, the nature of the images transformed. Around 12 hours after the cave-in, Alexandra began a series of self-portraits that tracked her psychological evolution with unflinching honesty. The first showed her face streaked with dust and sweat, eyes wide with the adrenaline of initial survival response. Later images captured increasing fatigue, then a profound shift to an expression of almost transcendent acceptance. What's remarkable is the absence of typical distress markers in the later portraits. There's no evidence of panic, rage, or despair. Instead, we see what appears to be a state of extraordinary mindfulness, a complete presence in the moment that few people achieve even under optimal circumstances. Perhaps most compelling was how Alexandra had transformed her lethal predicament into a final artistic statement. As her water supply diminished and rescue became increasingly unlikely, she devoted her remaining energy and camera battery to creating a series of images unlike anything in her previous portfolio. Using the absolute darkness of the cave as her canvas, she created long-exposure photographs in which her headlamp became a brush, painting swirls and patterns of light against the black background. Some resembled cosmic phenomena, spiraling galaxies, comets, the aurora borealis. Others had an almost calligraphic quality, as if she were writing in a language of pure light. "These aren't the desperate actions of someone facing death," said Maxwell Wright, a curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art who was consulted about the images. "They are the deliberate creative choices of an artist who recognized that she was experiencing something unique, a perspective no one else had shared, and felt compelled to translate that experience through her medium. It's both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring." The final sequence of images, taken when her headlamp battery was nearly exhausted and her water was gone, focused on a small catch of ceiling in the cave where moisture had created delicate mineral formations that captured and refracted the failing light. In her very last photograph, Alexandra had somehow positioned herself to appear in the frame alongside these formations, her face ghostly pale in the weak light, her expression of profound peace. Beneath this final image, she had written a caption in her journal: "The light reveals everything, even in darkness, especially in darkness." For Nathalie, reviewing these images was an experience of conflicting emotions. Grief at the confirmation of her sister's death, horror at the circumstances, but also a profound sense of connection to Alexandra's final moments and thoughts. "In some ways, this is the most Alex thing imaginable," she said, wiping tears as she studied the photographs. "She always said that her camera was how she processed the world, how she made sense of her experiences. The fact that she continued to create, to document, to translate even as she was dying, that's who she was at her core. She turned her own death into art." The physical evidence in the cave corroborated the story told by the photographs and journal. Alexandra had initially attempted to clear the cave entrance, as evidenced by bloodstains on the fallen rocks and skin tissue found under her nail fingers. When those efforts proved futile, she had systematically organized her limited supplies, rationing water to extend her survival time. As her situation became dire, she had created a small altar-like arrangement near where she ultimately died. Her compass, a smooth stone from a river, presumably carried as a personal token, and a small photograph of her family carefully placed in a triangle. Beside these items lay her satellite messenger device, its battery long dead, a final connection to the outside world that had failed her in her moment of greatest need.
Perhaps most poignant was the discovery that she had used the last of her water to clean her camera lens, prioritizing the quality of her final images over extending her survival by perhaps a few more hours. It was a choice that spoke volumes about what she valued most in her final moments. Not a desperate clinging to life, but the creation of something meaningful from her experience. In a very real sense, Alexandra was never lost, reflected Ranger Reeves during a private moment after the evidence analysis was complete. We were searching for her in all the wrong places, but she knew exactly where she was and what was happening to her. She didn't die in panic or confusion. She died with complete awareness, documenting her own end with the same thoughtfulness she brought to all her work. The ancient pictographs that had drawn Alexandra to the cave entrance added another layer of significance to her story. Consultation with indigenous cultural experts revealed that the specific symbols photographed by Alexandra were associated with vision quests and spiritual transitions, places where individuals would seek insight by temporarily separating themselves from the ordinary world. "There's a terrible irony there," noted Dr. Blackwell. She was drawn to this place by ancient markings that essentially signified a journey between worlds. Those who created these pictographs centuries ago would likely have seen a profound meaning in how Alexandra's story unfolded, not as a random tragedy, but as a kind of modern vision quest that ultimately became permanent. For the investigators, Park Service personnel, and family members who had spent 4 years wondering what had happened to Alexandra Sutton, the evidence painted a complete picture that was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. She had died alone in darkness, but not in terror or confusion. She had faced her fate with remarkable clarity and purpose, creating art until her final moments. The mystery that had haunted Yosemite for 4 years was finally solved, revealed by the very person they had been searching for through the medium that had defined her life. On a clear autumn morning, 6 months after the discovery of Alexandra Sutton's remains, a small gathering assembled at the Yosemite Valley Chapel. Unlike the memorial service held years earlier in the absence of her body, this was a true funeral, a final farewell with the certainty that had eluded her loved ones for so long. The simple wooden casket at the front of the chapel remained closed. After forensic examination, Alexandra's remains had been cremated, her ashes placed in a handcrafted urn made from a piece of Yosemite granite. But surrounding the casket was something extraordinary. Large museum-quality prints of the photographs recovered from her camera, including several from her final days in the cave. The decision to display these images had not been made lightly. Natalie had agonized over whether it would be appropriate to share such intimate documentation of her sister's final moments. In the end, she had concluded that nothing would honor Alexandra's memory more appropriately than allowing her final work to speak for itself. "My sister died as she lived, seeing beauty where others might see only darkness, finding meaning in moments that most would consider only tragic. These photographs aren't a record of her death. They're a testament to how she lived, right until her final breath." The funeral was attended by an eclectic gathering: family members, fellow photographers, park rangers who had searched for her, editors who had published her work, and even some of the forensic specialists who had analyzed her final images. Each person represented a facet of the complex mosaic that had been Alexandra Sutton's life and legacy. After the service, a smaller group traveled to a viewpoint overlooking the valley, where Natalie scattered a portion of her sister's ashes. The remainder would later be interred in a small memorial marker near the Yosemite Valley Visitor Center, alongside a permanent exhibition of her work. Beyond the personal closure for those who had loved her, Alexandra's story had far-reaching impacts. The images recovered from her camera became the subject of worldwide attention when, with the family's permission, National Geographic published a special feature titled "Final Light,"
The Last Works of Alexandra Sutton. The article included a curated selection of photographs from the cave, accompanied by excerpts from her journal. The response was unprecedented. Art critics hailed the images as a profound meditation on mortality and human response to extreme circumstances. Psychologists studied them for insights into resilience and meaning-making in terminal situations. Spiritual leaders of various traditions found in them a powerful metaphor for finding light in darkness. Museums across the country requested permission to display the photographs. After careful consideration, Natalie established the Alexandra Sutton Foundation to manage her sister's artistic legacy. The foundation organized a traveling exhibition that would eventually visit 23 cities worldwide, with all proceeds funding wilderness safety education and search and rescue training. For Yosemite National Park, Alexandra's case prompted significant changes in safety protocols and emergency response procedures. The discovery that she had been trapped in an unmapped cave less than a mile from her campsite, an area that had been searched multiple times during the initial effort, highlighted gaps in their search methodology. We were using standard grid patterns and probability models based on typical lost hiker behavior. But Alexandra wasn't a typical lost hiker. She was a professional photographer pursuing a specific creative vision, which led her to explore features that wouldn't attract most visitors. We've now updated our protocols to account for subject-specific behavioral patterns.
Perhaps most significantly, Alexandra's story changed how the park approached the psychological aspects of search and rescue. Her case demonstrated that a missing person might be making rational, deliberate choices based on their unique interests and skills, rather than following predictable patterns of lost behavior. We now include much more detailed information about the missing person's specific passions and tendencies, noted Ranger Diaz. In Alexandra's case, knowing that she was specifically seeking unusual light phenomena and unique photographic perspectives might have directed our search toward features like the cave entrance much earlier. For the broader outdoor community, Alexandra's story became both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. Her meticulous preparation and wilderness skills had not prevented tragedy, underscoring that even the most experienced backcountry users faced inherent risks. Yet her response to her situation, her clarity, creativity, and presence of mind offered a profound lesson in facing the unthinkable with grace. The small cave that had been Alexandra's final resting place was permanently sealed after recovery operations were complete. The Park Service decided against marking its location or making it accessible to the public, both to protect the ancient pictographs and to preserve the dignity of the site. In a formal ceremony attended by representatives from local Native American tribes, the cave was recognized as a place of passage and transformation, its entrance covered with stones, placed by hand rather than machinery. "Some places should remain wild and untouched," said Ranger Reeves, who had overseen both the initial search and the final recovery. Alexandra was drawn to this place because it existed beyond the mapped known world. There's a certain rightness in allowing it to return to that state. A year after the discovery of the cave, Natalie Sutton stood alone at the viewpoint where she had scattered her sister's ashes, watching the light change across the valley as sunset approached. In her hands, she held a small, weatherproof case containing a single photograph, the final image Alexandra had taken, showing her face alongside the mineral formations that had caught the last light of her dying headlamp. "I understand now what you were doing all those years," Natalie whispered to the wind. "You weren't just taking pictures, you were learning how to see. And in the end, you saw something none of us can imagine until we face it ourselves. Thank you for showing us how to look at the darkness and still find light." As the sun touched the horizon, it cast the entire valley in a golden glow that transformed the granite cliffs from cold stone to luminous monuments. It was the kind of light Alexandra would have traveled miles to capture, the perfect moment when the world revealed its hidden beauty to those patient enough to witness it. The story of Alexandra Sutton transcends the conventional boundaries of a wilderness tragedy. It is not merely an account of a woman who ventured into the backcountry and never returned, a cautionary tale of nature's indifference to human life. It is instead a complex meditation on how we face mortality, how we create meaning from circumstance, and how the impulse to document and translate experience can serve as a final act of connection with a world we are leaving behind. In the years since the discovery of the cave, Alexandra's final photographs have been studied by experts from diverse fields: art historians, psychologists, wilderness survival specialists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders. Each has found different significance in her work, different lessons in her response to what must have been the most terrifying situation imaginable: the absolute certainty of death in complete isolation. What strikes me most is the absence of despair, reflected Dr. Henderson in a follow-up interview for a documentary about Alexandra's case. The typical psychological progression in terminal entrapment situations follows predictable stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Alexandra seems to have moved almost immediately to a state beyond mere acceptance, to something more like transcendence. It's as if she recognized that she was experiencing something unique, something worth documenting, not despite its horror, but because of its singularity. This perspective was echoed by Buddhist teacher and wilderness guide Thomas Reed, who used Alexandra's story in his teachings about mindfulness and extreme situations. She achieved what many spiritual practitioners spend lifetimes seeking: complete presence in the moment, even when that moment contains one's own ending. Her photographs aren't a denial of death or an escape from it. They're a full engagement with the reality of her situation, transformed through her artistic vision into something meaningful. For those who venture into wilderness areas, Alexandra's story serves as a reminder of nature's fundamental duality: its capacity to inspire profound beauty and deliver sudden death, often in the same moment. The pictographs that drew her to the cave entrance represented generations of human attempts to make sense of this duality, to find meaning in the wilderness's indifferent power. The ancient peoples who created those images understood something we modern humans often forget. They recognized that the same landscape that provides sustenance and spiritual connection can also take life in an instant. Their art wasn't about conquering nature or even safely navigating it. It was about acknowledging their place in a vast, complex system that operated by its own rules. Alexandra's final journal entries revealed a similar understanding. Even as her situation grew dire, she wrote not about the unfairness of her fate or anger at the circumstances, but about the privilege of witnessing a perspective few had shared. Strange how clarity comes in darkness. I've spent years chasing light across landscapes, but now the absence of light reveals new truths. Perhaps this is what I was seeking all along. Not the subject itself, but the edges where one thing becomes another, where presence meets absence. For Natalie Sutton, her sister's legacy exists beyond the photographs or the circumstances of her death. In establishing the foundation that bears Alexandra's name, she created not just a memorial, but an active continuation of her sister's work in the world. The foundation has two primary missions, Natalie explained during the opening of a permanent exhibition at the Yosemite Visitor Center. First, to promote wilderness safety and education, helping others avoid similar tragedies. But equally important is supporting artists who, like Alex, use their work to deepen our connection to wild places. She believed that art could translate wilderness experiences in ways that created empathy and understanding, that seeing the natural world through another's eyes might help us protect what remains of it. The Alexandra Sutton Wilderness Photography Grant now provides funding for 5 emerging photographers each year, supporting extended projects in national parks and wilderness areas across the country. Recipients commit to both artistic excellence and educational outreach, sharing their work with communities that might otherwise have limited exposure to wild places. Perhaps the most profound impact of Alexandra's story has been on how we conceptualize the relationship between human mortality and the wilderness experience. Her final photographs challenge the conventional narrative of nature as antagonist, the hostile force that claims unwary visitors through indifference or active malice. Instead, they suggest a more nuanced perspective, that the wilderness offers not just physical challenge, but existential insight, an encounter with our own impermanence set against landscapes that have witnessed countless human lives flare and fade. Alexandra's work reminds us that we are always temporary visitors in wild places, passing briefly through systems that long preceded us and will continue long after we are gone. 4 years after the discovery of the cave, a small bronze plaque was installed at the Glacier Point overlook where Alexandra had begun her final journey. Unlike typical memorial markers that focus on loss, this one celebrated connection. It bore a simple inscription beneath her name and dates. She translated what the wilderness revealed: the light continues. For those who visit Yosemite today, Alexandra's presence lingers not as a ghost, but as a perspective, a way of seeing that transforms the landscape from mere scenery to a living conversation between light and stone, water and gravity, human perception and ancient process. Her final photographs, now permanently housed in the park's museum collection, stand as a testament to the power of the creative impulse, which can find meaning and beauty even in darkness and death. The wilderness does not compromise. It rises from the earth without prelude, a violent, jagged assertion against the sky. It is simply there, ancient, beautiful, and profoundly indifferent. For centuries, people have come to these places to test themselves, to find solace, or to capture a sliver of raw magnificence. Alexandra Sutton came for all these reasons and found something more, a final perspective that transformed tragedy into transcendence, darkness into light, and ending into an enduring legacy. If you've been moved by Alexandra's story, leave a comment sharing what wilderness has taught you. And if you know someone who finds meaning through photography or nature exploration, share this video with them. Some stories change how we see the world. This might be one of them. Until next time, remember that the most powerful stories are often the ones still waiting to be told.